Good evening, folks. Today is February 21st, 2023, and I'm welcoming you to the general board meeting of the Marin Municipal Water District. Can we get a roll call?
Yes. Director Jed Smith.
Here.
Vice President Ranjiv Kush. Director Larry Russell.
Here.
Director Matt Sampson.
Here.
And President Monty Schmidt.
Here. All right. We're going to adopt the agenda. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Are there any public comments only on the closed session?
There are none.
Okay. With that, we will convene to the close.
We have to vote.
Yeah, right. We have to
roll
vote
call
on.
for the agenda.
Yeah.
Is in
Can
order?
we-
Director Smith.
Aye.
Vice President Kush.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Director Sampson.
Aye.
And President Schmidt.
Aye. Okay, now we'll be convening to the closed session. And Terry, are we staying on this? Or are we departing to another? We're just,
We're departing, and I just sent
another
you
link.
the link again.
thank you. Good evening. So we are reconvening the regular board meeting of the Marin Municipal Water District. Our closed session ended at 6:24 p.m. tonight, and there was no reportable action on agenda item 1 and agenda item 2. We're going to be reconvening in closed session after the regular session tonight. Okay, with that, let's move on to public comment on items not on the agenda.
Yes, we do have one. I'd like to remind the public that you have 3 minutes to leave your comment. So the first speaker I have is Mr. Ed Jamison. So go ahead, Mr. Jamison.
Yes, thanks. I have some comments on the Jacobs Plan process. Estimating our need for drought isn't rocket science or even hydrological modeling. It's just simple forecasting, and Jacobs has it potentially ruinously wrong. For sizing our need for drought supply, the board needs to be shown a simple slide with beginning and ending reservoir levels and each of 4 years assumed supply, from rainfall runoff to normal water, recycled water, and new sources, and demand for production, stream releases, and evaporation. We're about to design a solution for way too small a problem. I believe Jacobs' estimated need of only 8,500 acre-feet per year is grossly inadequate based on arithmetic errors, and I believe upon several unrealistic assumptions. I believe the right answer is 15 or 20,000 acre-feet annually, depending upon whether we're willing to regularly needlessly spill a lot of expensive supply after only one dry winter. The board needs to be shown the simple slide I've described to assure that Jacobs' assumptions are reasonable. For a start, in our recent 2-year drought, we released 3,000 acre-feet a year more than Jacobs is assuming. And last May, MMWD said stream releases 1/3 higher than what Jacobs is assuming would be a reasonable 4-year forecast for drought, which would require 3,100 acre-feet a year more drought production than Jacobs is assuming. But there are other apparent mistakes, all adding up to a need for about 15 or 20,000 acre-feet per year of emergency supply. The board needs to be shown these numbers and assumptions, not yet another rehash of Jacobs' graphical wavy lines. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further comments.
Okay. Directors and general managers announcements.
Is this the time for giving committee updates? Great,
Yes.
then maybe I can start, Monty, with our Communications and Water Efficiency Committee report from last Wednesday, February 15th.
Please do.
And I have to thank Terry for her help here. That was a nice surprise. So just running through the summary, staff provided a water efficiency master plan update that is focused on developing goals to maximize water efficiencies while reducing water demands and developing targets to achieve them. Staff contacted EKI Consulting to assist the district with the water efficiency master plan update. They will be looking at evaluating indoor and outdoor water use trends and reviewing case studies of other comparators or industry leaders. And this final plan is scheduled for completion in the fall of 2023. Staff also gave the communications activities update, which provided a report out on the performance of the past quarter's digital outreach, an update on the multifaceted and ongoing public outreach plan for the 2023 rate setting process, and a public outreach plan that has been developed in coordination with Marin County Fire for implementation prior to any prescribed fire operation that Marin County Fire would perform on the watershed. Finally, under communications, an update on outreach plans for the ongoing strategic water supply assessment, including communication actions to be taken once the water supply roadmap is adopted by the board. And I'll just conclude by reminding the public that they can learn more about these presentations as well as watch the meeting by going to our district's website calendar for February 15th at marinwater.org/calendar. And that's it.
Okay, Monty, I have
Great.
one for the Operations Committee report on Friday, February 17th at 2023. Staff provided an update to the board on 3 construction projects in need of contract approval. Azalea Hill retaining wall, third amendment of asphalt concrete paving restoration and concrete work with W.K. McClellan, and 2023 San Rafael concrete culvert repair project. Each project was referred to the next board meeting for contract approval. The paving and restoration contract work project will be going to the board on March 7th. The other 2 projects will go on March 21st. Staff also provided an overview of alternatives for capital investment in the upcoming rate setting process. These included highlighting a range of possible projects to implement, as well as discussing each project's associated financial considerations. Staff highlighted several alternative options for capital investments beyond the baseline capital improvement program over the next 4 years, including increases to the baseline rate of renewal and replacement, execution of larger unfunded key priority projects, implementation of near-term water supply projects. For more information on the presentations provided by the Operations Committee, please visit the district's website calendar for February 17th at marin.org/calendar. For more information on the district's capital improvement projects, go to marin.org/CIP. Other than that, I don't have anything.
Great, thank you. Other board members?
Monty, I can go if that's okay. President Schmidt, excuse me.
Mhm.
I just want to start by saying a big thanks to all the staff for their efforts the past few weeks with all the public outreach meetings. It was a huge lift. It doesn't go unnoticed. Thank you very much. And I was able to attend the Zoom one on the rates, as well as the watershed and then the water supply. And I thought they're all well done. So thank you very much again for your work. This past Saturday, was able to get back out on the watershed, and thanks to Sean and Suzanne and their team for all the volunteer work that's going on for another broom pull down by Phoenix Lake. And we had a beautiful weather day, and it was great to see all the volunteers out there. But man, there is a ton of work to be done, and we're going to need a little bit more help than that. But kudos to all the volunteers who came out as well. End of report.
That's great. I'll just also add, I attended the public meeting last Wednesday at the Alboro Center in the community. And just, a huge appreciation to all the work that the staff put into Brett, boy, the presentations, you must be able to do those in your sleep at this point. But and all the other staff who came to show up to show how important these meetings are to the public. It's your evenings, and I really appreciate you folks making the time.
Yeah, quickly, anything else, President Schmidt, or should I add?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I was able to attend the Mill Valley meeting in person, and absolutely well done, well received, thoughtful. presentation, Brett, but also the whole team was there to support you and Marin Water. So I thought that was well received, and the public had some really good, thoughtful comments. Was also able to attend the virtual meetings for the watershed and for one of the other ones. So this staff is working hard, so nicely done. I also want to give a shout out to Crystal and Alex, who brought me to do a tour of some of our tank issues on Wolfpack and over in Sausalito. Pretty remarkable education for me about the number of tanks we have in this district, our unique setup, having acquired so many different smaller water districts over time. It's a complex system that is in need of investment and upgrades, and we're lucky to have these amazing qualified staff working for us.
Agreed. Any other directors' announcements? Ben, do you have anything?
Excuse me, I don't this evening, President Schmidt.
Okay, all right. Moving us along to item number 3, approval of the board minutes for February 2nd.
Actually,
special
President
meeting.
Schmidt, I think that the minutes are on a consent calendar.
Oh, right, sorry, my bad. Looking
Makes you-
down.
No problem.
Okay, then that takes us actually to our first regular agenda item, which is item number 10, which is
Or-
adopt.
I'm
No,
sorry.
we have to approve the
we-
consent calendar, money.
Yes.
We would
there go.
typically move it as a package unless there's interest in pulling any of the items off. for
I'll get better at these at the procedures here.
No
So,
worries, I'm here to help.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. And Larry too. You did it for a while. Okay, so a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Moved.
Second.
And roll call.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice President Kush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye. And now we'll move on to the regular calendar items. Number 10, which is the resolution adopting the 2019 San Francisco Bay Area Integrated Regional Water Management Plan update.
Yeah, good evening, board members. This is Matt Seges, the district's grant and legislative coordinator. Tonight, we're coming with you for a brief request to approve a resolution adopting the 2019 Bay Area Integrated Regional Water Management Plan update. IRWIM is a statewide effort focused on funding water supply, water quality, and flood protection projects. The district, which first adopted the Bay Area IRWIM plan in 2006, and then again in 2014, has participated in the plan since its inception, and has received funding for a range of projects, including water conservation rebates for customers, AMI pilots, and replacement of the Jewel Creek culvert in West Marin. Key updates in this 2019 Bay Area IRWIM plan update include an improved project review process to better reflect regional goals, updated groundwater quality information, and expanded disadvantaged community information and outreach plans. On December 8th, 2022, district staff were notified that an application for $6.5 million in funding for the Marin City Santa Fe Water Supply Resilience Project had been approved by the Bay Area IRWIM Coordinating Committee for inclusion in the regional Prop 1 Round 2 application to the Department of Water Resources. That recommendation, however, does require that the district formally adopt the 2019 IRWIM plan update before DWR will formally grant an award. For this reason, staff recommends that the board approve the proposed resolution adopting the 2019 Bay Area Integrated Regional Water Management Plan update.
Thank you, Matt. Board comments, questions?
Matt, could you give us just a few details on the Marin City project that's going to be included in the proposal to DWR?
The Marin City project replaces water mains and laterals, about 3.3 miles total in both Marin City as well as the Canal District in Santa Fe.
That's encouraging. That's great.
Other board comments? Terry, do we have any public
Support.
comments?
There are none.
Okay, can I get a vote or a first?
So moved.
Second, thanks, Matt.
Roll call.
Director Smith,
I,
Vice President Cush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye. Okay, moving along to item number 11, which is an updated 2023 water shortage contingency plan and implementation ordinance number 462.
So President Smith, this will be a public hearing. I just
Yeah.
wanted to let the board know because I think this is our first public hearing with some of our new board members. And so we'll hear a presentation and then President Schmidt will take questions from the board, open the public hearing for public comment, close the public
you.
hearing, and bring it back, just so everybody's clear on the process.
Again,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks, Molly. Good evening, President Schmidt, members of the board. Paul Sellier, Water Resources Director. I have a short presentation this evening recapping our water shortage contingency plan. Tonight is an approval item, as our General Counsel pointed out. So we'll be asking the board, subject to the outcome of the public hearing, to approve a resolution adopting the water shortage contingency plan this evening, along with proposed ordinance, draft ordinance 462. So our presentation, get going on this. So tonight we'll cover just briefly some of the occasions we've had to talk with the board about this particular topic on water shortage contingency planning. We'll review quickly the triggers, triggers are composed of two things. One is a date, and the other is some sort of actionable, descriptor, in our case, storage levels. And then we'll take a brief look at a summary of the shortage response actions that are associated with each stage before briefly touching on the proposed ordinance number 462, which will incorporate the water shortage contingency plan into our code. And then we'll have conclude with a staff recommendation. So we've had a number of occasions over the past year or so, most recently at the District Operations Committee on January 13th to discuss with the board, and we had some good comments and discussion on it at that time, where the committee reviewed the item to the board for adoption, which is our goal this evening. Briefly then, we're proposing triggers that are based on local storage, which provides 75% of our supply. So it is, kind of an important indicator for us. The other thing, questions that we heard last time were concerns that, local storage doesn't reflect our whole water supply. In other words, our water supply from Sonoma County, our partners to the north. And in fact, it doesn't explicitly include it, but all of our projections factor in our reservoir storage level forecasts factor in the availability of water from Sonoma. So in dry years, we would adjust that number down in our projections. And indeed, the projections that you've seen in the latter stages last year all included reduced amounts from Sonoma. And were we to pick up new water supplies, any new water supply would, of course, change how quickly our reservoir storage levels would decline. So reservoir storage levels, we feel, while they are a local indicator, do provide a strong indicator for us and a firm basis upon which we can take action. The levels that you see here this evening were selected in part based on the frequency at which we've hit them over the past years. We've strived for not setting up a level that we would never attain, but also one that we don't hit every year. So you'll see in the most frequent case in the lower table here where it talks about the frequencies, the stage 1 or 10% range, we've hit that 12 times since 1983. So it's every third year or so we might start to get close to this number. So again, we think that they're set at about the right place, and of course we can adjust these in the fullness of time if we find that they aren't. So overall, a good indicator for our water supply. The other component of a trigger is, of course, the timing. When would we implement? When would we look to measure that particular trigger? And in our case, we've keyed on the date of April 1st, primarily because that's when the majority of our rain has occurred, and we know with some certainty, what our water storage is going to do for the remaining year. We can, of course, take action earlier than April 1st. For example, in 2020, when it was a historically dry spring, we were, had certain reservoir projections, and the board would have been able to take action at that time. So we think that the triggers, not only are they a good indicator, the way that they're set up, there's some flexibility in how the board could enact them. And in terms of the timing, April 1st is what we've settled on. So the triggers you can see here, stages 1 and 2 are voluntary at 70,000 acre feet and 65,000 acre feet. And the chart to the right here shows our average storage level curve. So our average storage level April 1st is approaching 74,000 acre feet, something like this. We're proposing a trigger of 70,000 acre feet. At stage 3, we're mandatory up to 30% conservation and all the way through from there to stage 6, which would be greater than 50% mandatory conservation. So looking then at some of the response actions that we could take, the response actions fall into 2 general classes. Those are actions that the district itself would be taking, the sort of operational changes, the outreach that we'd be undertaking, and in certain cases, the imposition of drought rates or surcharges. For our customers, there are prohibitions on the use of water that would be sort of becoming ever more restrictive as the stage levels increased. We've kept in there a variance process so that if there are hardship or financial, medical, or other issues, our customers can apply to us for an exception. Again, looking at these are the examples of the district's operational changes that we might take. For, if you notice in stage 1, at 70,000 acre feet, voluntary 10%, we would be looking to perhaps increase supplemental water imports from Sonoma and really closely monitor our weather conditions to make sure we're in the right stage level. Since it's likely been dry in the winter, we'd be looking at the precipitation records to see if we hit those levels in our stream release agreements that would allow us to reduce those stream releases. And then by the time we start getting into stage 2, we're thinking about maybe minimizing our system flushing, which is something that we do every year. We flush the system in a directional manner just to kind of keep it clean. And we would be minimizing those activities and starting to think about initiating water waste patrols, and even if it was dry enough, the implementation of drought rates. And from stage 3, we're now in the mandatory stage where we would be really looking to take some actions that we don't do typically. For example, accessing emergency supply of water from Sulahuly and Phoenix reservoirs. Again, further restricting any line flushing to only the regulatory compliance actions and increasing our system leak repair rate. And you can see our actions sort of step up as the stages do, all the way down to stage 6, which was essentially a catastrophic interruption of our water supply, where we could be asking our customers to really only use indoor water. This is what we call health and safety water allotments. And so those are some of the operational changes that the district would be taking under the water shortage contingency plan in the various stage levels. Our customers, as I mentioned, also have actions that we would be asking of them. Largely their prohibitions on water use. And you'll notice in stage 1 and 2, the district has a fairly lengthy list of water waste prohibitions that are kind of permanently in effect. Our normal year prohibitions. And so we don't actually have any additional actions for our customers to take in stages 1 and 2. Those you'll see on the next slide. We'll be stepping up our public outreach around those prohibitions to make sure that they understand them and that they're following them. When we get to stage 3, mandatory up to 30%, this is where we start adding in additional restrictions around washing of vehicles, using potable water for, decorative fixtures. Golf course irrigation comes into the picture at that point, along with power washing, and then we start looking at limiting sewer cleaning and flushing with only recycled water. And as you can see, those actions sort of continue, again, all the way up to stage 6, where it's really health and safety water allotments only. Our water shortage plan relies obviously heavily on communication. And so there's a whole slide here devoted to the communication and outreach responses that we would be taking during each of these stage events. If you recall, during stages 1 and 2, I mentioned that there were no additional prohibited uses for our customers, but you can see here the sort of suite of outreach actions in stages 1 and 2 really starts to ramp up the messaging campaign around saving water and using water wisely to help us prevent water waste. And in stage 3, again, it's all about accelerating that messaging campaign, amplifying the messages, making sure that they understand that we are in fact starting to reduce weekly watering to where it's not enough water for some of the plants that may exist in our gardens and parks. And by the time we get to stage 4, it's, this is the level at which we'd be thinking this is a water shortage emergency. And it starts to get into sort of tree preservation, where it's really limiting water use for irrigation purposes. And the messaging campaign continues to sort of ramp up through stage 6 in that manner. Briefly then, Ordinance 462 is a fairly straightforward ordinance in that it's nice and cleanly written by our general counsel, which has just a couple pages of the actual details around implementation of the water shortage contingency plan, and then a couple pages of the legal authorizations associated with that. There's not too much more to add unless you wanted to add anything, Molly, about the ordinance itself. So I'll just jump to the last slide, which is our staff recommendation this evening. We're asking the board for approval of the resolution to adopt the 2023 water shortage contingency plan and adopting the proposed ordinance number 462 to amend the district code and add provisions to the implementation of the water shortage contingency plan. That is the end of my presentation this evening. Unless you wanted to get into the extra slides, but that's really a lot of details around some of those prohibitions.
Thanks, Paul. Board comment?
Yeah, Paul, maybe I can start. I was just wanted to clarify the variances that might be available to end users. I know, for example, that our sanitary districts can really struggle with flushing of their systems when access to recycled water or the transport of recycled water is difficult. And I think considering the challenges that they may face and working with them, when possible, would be beneficial. So I just wanted to hear about how the what the variances are available for that sort of thing.
Yeah, so in the Director Costa, in the last drought emergency, if I could say that, the sanitary agencies were asked to use recycled water whenever it was possible, and they were given access to potable water hydrant meters to fill their trucks to prevent any sort of sanitary emergencies. So that was sort of the variance that we followed for them.
Thanks.
Any other comments?
I just wanted to To tell Paul and then to Carrie too, thank you very much for the detail on this. This plan is a lot more clear for me to understand and hopefully for the end user as well. And appreciate the sensitivity towards the frequency of occurrences as well as honing in on a pretty close date to when we should make our decisions by. So that helps a lot from the direction from the board's perspective, or at least from mine. I see this really as a partnership with our customers. We're asking for a reduction in water, and I think what makes it difficult continually is the bi-monthly bill and not understanding their own usage. So how do you respond? What is a reduction? So I look forward to be able to close that gap hopefully in the near future. And I think we'll start seeing a lot more success with this plan, but thank you.
Any other board comments?
Well, I think this is a pretty significant step towards drought-based pricing, right? I mean, this will help us. It feels like, Paul, not get into the bind that we got in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's a comprehensive plan. It includes the provision for the board to, subject to the 218 and the rate setting process that you're going through now, to bring in drought rates, drought surcharges, whatever they end up being called. Yes, I think it is comprehensive and sets that basis for the board.
Great. Larry? Nothing, Dad. I think, thank you. I think that, there are, I think what we've come up with, I think is responsive to our experience with the recent drought. And that is important. We are always learning, the climate we are in is not the climate we had 5 years ago, 10 years ago, let alone 50, or when the district was formed. And so we needed to come up with a different methodology, a means by which we adapt to our circumstances. And so I think this is a really important milestone accomplishment to learn from the past and to come up with a means by which we can be more quickly responsive to our situation and not wait until the crisis is so heavily upon us it's unavoidable or that it's unnoticeable. We can do things in advance. I think that we will need to educate, as Director Sampson mentioned, that our communities about these different stages, to understand that that stage one happens at a level where some people would look at our reservoir storage and say, there's plenty of water there. Why are we even being concerned? And I think that the point is that we are mindful that we never know what the summer will bring and what the following winter will provide us. And so again, we're being thoughtful about the situation we're in, and there's a fairly modest number of actions we would take. But of course, we grow as the conditions get more dire, we ratchet up what we're going to do. So I just think it's important for us to explain to the public why we could be going in and out of things. If stage one is going to happen in 1 out of 3 years, people could have fatigue around the notion of like, we're constantly in drought. What's wrong? Didn't we fix this problem? Are we not really actually addressing the problem? I think we're going to need to figure out a way to explain to folks that this will always be the nature of how we manage water, that this is what buys us reliability and security, is by having things like this, in addition to the storage and other things that we are developing as part of our water supply resiliency planning. This will be an added job for Adrian to communicate this effectively and well across our community. So thank the staff for bringing this together. I think it's very thoughtful and responsive, and I appreciate it. Do we have any public comment?
Yes.
At this time, President Schmidt, let's open the public hearing officially. Then we can.
Yes, we'd like to open this now to officially to public comment.
Yes, we have 3 speakers so far. Just would like to remind the public you have 3 minutes. So the first speaker I have is Phil Sauter, Roger Roberts, and then Ed Jamison. Go ahead, Mr. Sauter.
Thank you. I want to echo Director Schmidt's comments in terms of the importance of being able to communicate this to the public. And one of the things as I look at this presentation is I'm struck by the lack of quantitative data. I understand all the different things that the district might be asking customers to do, but I have absolutely no sense as to what the impact of taking those actions would be. For example, do we know how many gallons of water we could actually save if we put a prohibition on washing cars versus put a prohibition on outdoor water use? Do we know, for example, how many gallons are used if we irrigate once a week versus twice a week? Does it make sense to look at hours of irrigation versus days of irrigation? I really, if I were on the board, I don't know how I could actually get my head around approving this ordinance without actually having some of the supporting data that says, what does it mean if we ask people to do this? Some of these requests to customers might turn out to be a nuisance. It'll bother the customer without really saving that much water. I have a feeling that there's probably one or two or three things that we could ask customers to do that are really important, and the rest of them probably don't really account for much. But without the actual data, without understanding it, and I think maybe we have this from the various conservation efforts we've made, can we find out what the impact of these is? What will it get us versus how much will it aggravate our consumers? So I'm looking for data as always. Thank you.
Mr. Roger Roberts, please.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for this presentation, but I have a question, and forgive me if I have a little confusion. It appears that it's stage 3 at 55,000 acre feet that's going to trigger drought pricing. Now, the drought pricing isn't necessarily congruent with the revenue position of the organization. And I'm not sure how you reconcile the need for revenue if it's only going to be put into place at stage 3. I'm not clear to me is whether those are congruent and actually interdependent. It may well be that at an earlier stage, we're going to want to trigger some drought pricing, or you may want to have a sliding scale for drought pricing, depending on how deep your losses of reservoir storage are. I think that's something that needs to be studied a little more clearly, and I think maybe a sliding scale will be necessary in the future for drought pricing in connection with your actual situation, whether you're in stage 2, 3, or 4. Thank you.
President Schmidt,
Oh, would you like to respond to that?
Add a little color commentary, maybe. Thank you, Mr. Roberts, for the question. Drought rates start, I think, in stage 2. The design of the rates, of course, I think, which is some of your question in terms of the sliding scale, I think it is in Brett's court. Sorry, Brett. But there'll, I'm sure, be discussion around the design of those rates, allowing flexibility for the board to select a rate that that sort of matches our needs for revenue.
So if I may jump in, Paul, just to be clear, the water shortage contingency plan and this proposed ordinance do not put in place drought rates. That will be brought forward as part of the Proposition 218 rate setting process. It does need to go through that process. But what's anticipated is that drought rates will be adopted and that they will have be tied to the amount of conservation that the stages would then act, and the board, via resolution pursuant to the ordinance, would ask our customers to be conserving as a whole, so as an aggregate amount. And you're right about further detail, Paul, coming as part of the drought rate process. We'll be looking at the way that those are suggested to be implemented as the sort of piece that fits into the water shortage contingency plan as part of the rate setting process. And Brett may have more.
Well, we're actually going to get deep into that at the next item.
Mr. Ed Jamison and then Mr. Larry Minikes. Go ahead, Mr. Jamison.
Yes, thanks. This was another excellent presentation by Paul. Concerning updating the water shortage contingency plan, we are presently in a terrible spot with inadequate supply to deal with the drier future. I can't disagree with the proposed levels as interim emergency measures, but these absolutely must not be used in determining our needs in the present Jacobs plan. For that, we need to stick with the existing district code levels adopted in 1999, with voluntary emergency conservation if only 10% invoked when depleted reservoirs hit 50,000 acre feet in April. As for the Jacobs plan, as shown on their table 5, it assumes that emergency conservation measures will be invoked well before the present code calls for. Depending upon regular emergency conservation, perhaps every 3 years, would be absolutely no way to plan for our future needs. And finally, I'd like to understand how much flexibility the district has in reducing regulatory stream releases during drought. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Larry Minikes.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Paul, for the presentation. And in regard to the ordinance specifically, it's a missing piece. It's very much needed. Glad to see that it's going to be implemented, or expect that it will be implemented tonight. And thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, fantastic. Can I get a motion to approve? Or
We can close the public hearing and then we can.
did we
take
close the
action.
public hearing first? Okay, we are now closing the public hearing.
For the record, yes.
For the record. Thank you, sorry. And then Molly, just help me walk through it, then we approve. We take a motion to approve.
So President Schmidt, we have 2 items, a resolution and an ordinance. Unless there are objections, a motion could be made for both, to move both forward in one action, if that's the interest of the board. So yes, a motion and a second for both of those if there's an interest to move them together.
Okay, so I will make I'll put forward, can I get a motion to approve in one vote the water shortage contingency plan and implementation of the ordinance?
So moved.
Second.
Can I get a roll call vote?
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice President Cush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye. With that, I will now be closing our public hearing and resuming our regular board meeting. And that will bring us to agenda item number 12, which is a rate setting process update. This is an informational item.
Yeah, thank you, President Schmidt. This is my item. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen here. Agenda item 12, there we go. All righty, so I have 2 broad topics here today to cover. At the end, I'll talk about drought rates, which is what we just talked about in terms of in relation to the water shortage contingency plan. But first, I'm going to give a brief recap of our customer workshops that being conducted over the last 2 weeks. And so this is the kind of general outline for my item, rate setting process overview, workshops and drought rates. As I've showed this slide a few times, this is really kind of the key 2 steps or the key pieces of our rate setting process. Cost of service analysis is ongoing and underway. That explores recent trends, our rate structure, and our revenue requirement, meaning how much money do we need to raise in the future years to fund the operations. In tandem with that is our public outreach and engagement efforts. And those are shown there on the right-hand side: board meetings, customer workshops, websites, bill inserts, district e-news, and a whole host of other avenues in which we try to make sure we're doing our best to inform the public about each step along the way and provide as much information as we can. So those are ongoing and in progress now. In particular, I wanted to report out on last week's customer workshops, or the customer workshops over the last 2 weeks, I should say. District staff hosted 4 customer workshops, 3 of which were in person, 1 of which was virtual last Thursday. The same information was presented at each workshop. We wanted to make sure that each of our customers had a chance to hear the point in time presentation. We wanted to provide more informal settings for customers to provide feedback and kind of go back and forth on questions and discussions. We did record the virtual meeting from Thursday, and that is online at the website shown here on the slide, marinwater.org/2023 rate setting. In addition to the actual presentation and meeting that we did, the standalone slide deck is also available there. So at these 4, before I get into that, ongoing, we'll keep adding to this website as well. This is the 2023 water rate setting website. There's currently quite a little bit of information, including all the presentations we've given so far, more detailed information about your bill. And then as we get farther in the process, we'll continue to update this website. So what I wanted to mostly report on today was just kind of the themes of feedback from our customers over the 4 different meetings. And obviously we couldn't capture every single conversation. We had quite a few conversations over the 4 days, but I tried to group these here into kind of broader themes that came up. And the idea, I'll go through them here, I'll read most of them on here and I'll kind of summarize them for the board here. But in terms of district priorities, some of the common questions were, or comments, I guess feedback is that we just need to make sure we're ensuring greater future water supply, more water supply security. We've got the question posed, why is there so much deferred maintenance in the district? We also got the kind of general comments we want to consider preserving our debt capacity for future large projects and not to use debt for kind of ongoing regular rehabilitation projects. And we were also received the comment of the district should be pursuing infrastructure grants where possible. On rate increases there on the right-hand side, similar themes. If we do increase rates, we should make sure we're dedicating funds towards infrastructure, making sure that the rates go up across the board, not just specifically in certain areas. A common comment we've got is that bills have already increased the last couple of years and couple cycles, and more so for low water users. I think that's kind of more of another way to say those are fixed fees increased a lot in the last couple rate cycles, and so low water users saw a higher percentage than did higher water users. And then affordability. Affordability is a primary priority for the district, and we need to make sure we consider keeping it a high priority, and especially for seniors and low income customers. And so we did have a couple slides to cover that, and then we got some more encouragement to keep on building out that program to keep it one of the best in the region here. In terms of rate design on the bottom there, we talked a lot about tier breaks, and I think in general customers understood what we were talking about and said that it tends to make sense to shape the tiers to match our current usage patterns. We got a lot of comments about excessive water users should pay more. If we're going to increase rates, that the excessive water users should pay more. On the other flip side of that, we did also have some comments about don't penalize customers who've already conserved, and also that outdoor use, particularly for gardening, should not be considered water waste. So kind of a refined, or a call to refine our categorization of high water users for gardening versus other purposes. And then finally, on other, I think presentation feedback, we received some comments that the monthly bill comparisons versus our bi-monthly billing process can be confusing. We had a lot of comparisons to PG&E and maybe running a program like the balanced stable billing cycle that PG&E runs for its customers. The general comment that we should cut our expenses first before looking to increase rates. And then we got a few comments about recycled water and gray water programs and how that could be beneficial, not only for water supply, but also to help reduce the need for rate increases. So all in all, I would say these were really good comments we received. I think we had good conversations, and in the more informal setting that we were able to take on in these customer workshops, we were able to kind of go back and forth and really address these questions. Not just me, but General Manager Horenstein and also other members of staff were all there. We had tabling exercises before the presentation, so customers could really see what it takes to run a water system from start to finish. And like I said, we had plenty of staff around for follow-up questions and even more informal discussion after the fact. So I really appreciated customers taking their time to come out and learn more about the water system. I think, like I said, we wrote down all the comments and questions, and we're certainly taking these into consideration going forward. I think it really is a better practice that we did this year to go out early and engage the public in a more thoughtful way, rather than waiting until the process was done and just kind of explaining what the outcome was. And so I think it'll all make for a better product in the long term. And so again, I wanted to thank the customers that did come out and for taking their time to provide feedback, and know that we are listening, and we are trying to incorporate as much of this as we can going forward. This is kind of the end of the customer workshop report out. So I wanted to maybe pause here and see if the board has any comments here before I go on to the next topic, which is more rate setting and drought rates. And so I'll pause here in case there's any comments or feedback from the board.
Any board comments? Okay, Brett, I think you can keep going.
Good. Okay, next item within this presentation in terms of rate setting process is the cost of service analysis update. Really, I mean, everything kind of feeds into revenue requirements in the sense of how much revenue do we need to generate to run the district. Particular today, I want to talk about reserves and drought rates, and even more particular, it's drought rates. The two of those in my mind are kind of interrelated, as they're both, ways to mitigate, revenue losses and uncertainty in the future. And so I'll go kind of give another basic run through where we're at. Again, step-by-step process for cost of service analysis. We're really on those last two stages here. Over the next couple of weeks, of determining the overall revenue requirement, and then how do we put that into a design that is proportional and equitable amongst our customer classes. When we talk about revenue requirements, and these are things I've covered in past presentations, but talk about revenue requirement, talk about not only the baseline budget, making sure that we can fund the services that are currently on the district's books. We also learned last week, or kind of took a deeper dive into the capital improvement, even the baseline there of about 20 million. And even though we're dedicating 20 million a year there, we also have a growing backlog, meaning that the amount of work just to kind of repair and replace the normal project and normal infrastructure pieces is actually more than 20 million a year. So we're at a pretty steep climb here just on operations and capital. Revenue requirement will also cover water supply enhancements, as those were not in the last budget cycle or rate cycle. So both short-term projects and then longer term planning as well. We do have some larger unfunded capital projects we've talked about that may be a better fit for debt service, as they probably would consume more than a full year of capital funds on an annual basis. Service level enhancements, we've talked about, where can we make targeted improvements in the operating side of the district, and so where those might make sense. And then finally, reserve replenishments. First of all, making sure we're doing our part to adhere to our debt covenants and keeping our credit ratings high. But as the star indicates there on the bottom today, we'll talk more about drought rates and how those kind of play in with reserves, that overall prioritization. So when we talk about reserves here, risk analysis, again, this goes back to a presentation about 6 weeks ago now, but there's industry standards, kind of this basic targets to shoot for. There's also agency specific factors. And within that, you want to take a look at your revenue and expense profile, to get an assessment of your infrastructure, and then really kind of have a sense of how much you want your rates to stay uniform each year versus how much you'd rather than kind of go up and down as needed. So kind of that stabilizing principle there. Another concept we talked about with reserves is they really are part of the overall comprehensive planning process. And I think we're really in the midst of that now, but rate structure is typically about a 4-year process. We have a 2-year budget, by design there, you have 2 budgets within a rate cycle. A capital plan is a little bit more longer term in terms of a 10-year planning cycle. And then really this longer term strategic plan, you also want to make sure you're layering that over and make sure that each of those complement each other. Reserves factor into all 4 of those, right? You want to have short-term reserves, long-term reserves, so a plan to build them up to a certain level in the future. And then a way that you use them strategically. Reserves are meant to be used. They're meant to be, a part of that offset and stabilizing factor. And then you also have to build them up when the time calls for it. So they play a piece in each of those. And then what I would say here on the bottom is that drought rates are an important part of our financial risk mitigation, in the fact that they kick in mid-cycle, mid-budget cycle, mid-rate cycle, and they definitely impact our revenue levels, and they may reduce our need for specific drought reserves, or at least be complementary to what we do have on the books for drought reserves. So drought rates, more specifically here, they're a common practice for water utilities in any area of the country. The discussion is more using drought rates versus drought reserves, and reserves meaning we collect money up front and we use that to kind of withstand any drought conditions we do face over the 4-year rate cycle, as opposed to drought rates, which are surcharges that are implemented mid-cycle to increase the revenue to make up for the conservation efforts. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's really an agency specific preference, which way you'd like to go. Here at Marin Water, we've relied on drought reserves in the past, so we have not used drought rates. We have not implemented them into our rate structure. And I've talked in a couple of different presentations about how we've relied on reserves, and they've been well funded and they did their purpose over the last drought. However, if you look into the best practices and a lot of the way other agencies, certainly here in the Bay, are working, you have to have a combination of both. Really, you can't have one without the other. You can, but it's less ideal. So having both at your disposal is definitely a recommended practice. Taking a little bit of a step back to the guidance that's out there from American Water Works Association, the AWWA. The definition of a drought rate is a separate charge that's added to the rate structure to collect a targeted amount of revenue. So it really kind of puts it into the short-term lens, and this, you have a target you're shooting for, and so you have a separate rate structure that's on top of kind of any existing water rates. The purpose is very limited in time frame. You want to have a beginning and an end. It shouldn't be an ongoing process. Cost recovery is really the primary goal of kind of keeping pace on your revenues with the expenses that may be fixed and may not change when you do encounter a drought. There's also an aspect of pricing incentive, right? So as we're all conserving, we want to make sure that for those that are conserving as well, that they don't pay absorbently about more, and that those who don't comply with the conservation, that they have a disincentive, essentially, that they would be incentivized to use less based on the pricing model. Best practices from AWWA at the bottom here is that you would integrate your drought rates with a drought management plan, as they call it. I think we call it here a water shortage contingency plan. So that's what Paul just reviewed, Paul and Molly reviewed in the last public hearing. I think you want to clearly distinguish your drought rates for each cycle, each stage of the drought, and I'll talk about that here, and Paul already had outlined most of that. And then I think that the point on the bottom here is really important. And that the design of drought rates should hold customers harmless if they comply with targeted savings. So holding harmless means your bill at the end of the month, or a 2-month cycle in our case, but your bill shouldn't change. If you're using 20% less water and you have a 20% rate increase or drought rate increase there, hopefully your actual bill at the end of the day is the same. Now, obviously you're using less water, so you're paying a higher unit price, but the idea is not to have customers pay more during a drought. It's just basically to keep their payments flat, and so that the district can continue running. I think a big piece of this here is that the district has about 95% fixed costs. And so when we do encounter a drought, we're conserving to help preserve our water supply, obviously, but we're not able to pull back our expenses as much. And so drought rates really help fill in that gap over time. And ideally, again, for the customers, they should be held harmless, or it should be no change or minimal change to their actual monthly expense if they comply and they actually reduce their consumption accordingly. So then revenue sufficiency is the last piece of this here that I'll go through. And so I mentioned before that a combination of drought rates and drought reserves are typically required. And the other common aspect here when you encounter a drought is expenditure management. And so I think the industry guidance says that there's never a perfect way to design drought rates or reserves to where you can just power right through and not change how you're behaving as an organization during a time of drought. And so you're going to have to probably pull back expenditures. You're going to have to do what you can to fill in the gaps and really weather the storm, or in this case the lack of a storm, until you get a chance to kind of reset and plan going forward. So drought rates, reserves, and also active expenditure management are generally required when you are facing a drought. As the second bullet says here, the drought rates alone cannot account for all fiscal impacts of the drought. And for the 3 bullet points that are shown here, first of all, we never know how much conservation is actually going to happen, right? So we can make targets out there, we can design our programs and our incentives and disincentives accordingly, but you don't really know the actual levels of conservation. There's also timing issues that go into that, in terms of when the drought actually starts happening, when we're able to communicate and or implement our drought rates. It can be a mismatch of a couple months within that process. And then I think, as we saw in the last drought, there can be a mismatch of local versus regional messaging, right? So even though here where we have our own kind of self-sustained system of water, we may be hearing state level messaging and or reading articles in the paper about the Colorado River or Lake Mead or whatever it may be. So you're not always the only message your customers are hearing. And so a long way of saying there could be a mismatch between what we design on paper and what actually happens out there in the real world. Unforeseen expenditures is the next part down here. So typically drought rates are intended to recover the revenue you planned on pre-drought. But there could also be, as we said, again, we experienced this in the last couple of years here at the district, when you're trying to secure extra water supply, it's in high demand, everyone's in the same boat. And so it can be more expensive to import water. as you increase your outreach efforts to make sure that the message is getting out there, that can have additional expenses. And then if you start to embark on longer term planning or any kind of other capital projects to help secure water supply in the middle of that cycle, those can also be unforeseen expenditures. So it's impossible to predict exactly how those will shake out. And then the duration, right? We don't know exactly how long a drought will be impacting us. So you may think it's going to be 1 month or 2 months or 6 months, and it could be much more, it could be much less. I think as Paul's mentioned a few times, we've had quite a few miracle marches around here, and that's why we chose to choose April 1st for the trigger point, but not that it hasn't rained before after April 1st ever around here either. So I think with climate change coming our way, I think it's less and less, we're less and less able to predict the future of weather. And so again, the duration of the drought is impossible to predict, and we're always going to be a couple months behind it. So all that's a long way of saying that drought rates aren't a perfect end all be all. They're not the silver bullet, but they're a very important factor to have in our toolbox per se, as we enter the next rate cycle, as we enter the next weather cycle. So this is a slide kind of on mechanics of what drought rates are and aren't, right? And so yeah, I think there's 2 slides here that are really trying to get through some of the math behind it all. And these aren't perfect numbers. They're meant to be kind of illustrative examples, intentionally here. But typically speaking, what I want this slide to show is that the actual rate increase on the far right over there may be actually more than the prescribed conservation level. So shortage levels here, similar to what Paul showed, from 1 to 6, from 70,000 acre feet on April 1st down to 25,000 acre feet on April 1st. Here's these 2 columns. In each of these shortage levels, we would be asking our customers for reductions of certain percentages and taking all the actions we mentioned in the last item. On the backside of that, in order to get full recovery on our revenues, the percentage may be a little different. And so these are very kind of straightforward numbers. I have a note down here at the bottom that says that the drought rate that we would implement would actually be reduced a little bit because we have some marginal cost savings. So the way you calculate it is if we're spending a little bit less money on producing water because we're all using less water, we can't recover that cost, right? So that cost is essentially taken out of the mix. And so you may not get a perfect lineup of 25 or 43%. And there's a little couple other nuances that go into this, but the whole slides here basically is to say that these are the 6 levels we'll have on the books. And then these drought rates are kind of an indication of where the ranges might be in terms of a percent increase if we go that route. I would also just say on this slide too, that as Molly mentioned, drought rates aren't automatic. They don't go in with the item we just adopted. We would be bringing specific items on around those times for the board's consideration. And the goal here is to match the drought rate with what you're actually seeing, what the actual experience is for our customers' conservation efforts. So there may be, it may not be a perfect match here, and I'll go into that a little bit in a slide or two, but these are just general ranges for what we could expect if it was exactly as we planned out. The math behind that.
I just a quick comment on this. I think it's really important for the public to hear it, and for maybe some of the folks writing into the IJ and folks that we're hearing. What this shows is that if you conserve, if you reduce your demand, you are less likely to have higher rates. So it's the opposite of what we're hearing from people, like, oh my God, you made us conserve and now the rates are going up. If you conserve water, if you save, if we keep water in our reservoirs, the rates won't go up as much. This is a strong incentive to reduce demand, reuse your water, and not waste it. I think that is the key message for this pretty significant change.
Yeah, and that's a good point. As I mentioned earlier, I think in a perfect scenario, if you lined it up right, the bill would be exactly the same. If you conserve, your bill will not be higher than it was pre-drought or pre-shortage level stage. So that's exactly what this gets into. The math behind it, and I won't spend a lot of time here. Just I feel like it's good to explain why the percentages would be higher, than maybe the drought rate stage we may be in. And so I have 2 scenarios here. I have a 20% stage in the blue towards the top, and I have a 30% stage here in the gray in the bottom. And in both cases, the math works out this way. And I'll kind of go through this where, your normal CCFs, and this is round numbers again, just making it easy on the eyes. But if you had your normal CCF of 10 million per year or so, and you had a rate of about $5, you get about $50 million from revenue. If you had a 20% reduction in use, that brings it down to 8 million CCFs. If you kept your $5 rate, if you didn't enact drought rates, you'd be losing 10 million here, right? You're going down 50 down to 40. So you'd be losing $10 million. If we just raise rates 20% to make up for the 20% reduction, the way the math works out there is we generate 48 million. So certainly a step in the right direction, but it's not the 50 million we had pre-drought. So to make it perfectly aligned, you'd have to actually increase rates 25% over here, to 625 per unit. And that would generate your $50 million to get you back to where you were normal. Same concepts apply down here in a 30% scenario. It's just a much bigger number, 43 over 30, which is kind of the law of if you have a smaller base, you have to increase a little bit more to get back to that same nominal revenue. And again, the idea here is that you plan on a budget ahead of time, 95% fixed costs. You really need to get that $50 million, in theory, into the district. Anything you don't bring in there has to be relied on for reserves. A 30% reduction can be significant, as it shows here, $15 million. So the drought rates really help, establish a floor there, establish a, kind of a way to not have to wait everything for the next rate cycle to fix. And so it's a really effective tool, especially in the short term, especially, when you're in the throes of the drought, to be able to mitigate the financial impact to the district. And then one final note here, again, just for our understanding administratively, the drought rates won't be perfect, right? So I had a whole slide on why it's impossible to make it perfect. And then up here, it's kind of another way of saying that they're most effective if there's an exact match between our demand reduction and our trigger targets. Knowing that there'll never be an exact match, this slide is kind of intended to show where the holes are, right? So first of all, we don't have drought rates until stage 2. So if there's a 0, 10, 15, even up to 19% reduction in demand, we don't have drought rates that would make up for that. So the district could see anywhere between a 6 and a 9. And if you push that up to 19%, about $12 million revenue loss, because we haven't hit that full stage 2 yet, right? So that's the part we have to put aside in reserves to make it through a year or two in that level, because we wouldn't have drought rates at our disposal during that time. We could still have expenditure management, so we could maybe offset this, but in the pure revenue look, we'd be looking somewhere between 6, 9, and that's, like I said, up to 12 million or so if we don't actually hit stage 2. Once you hit stage 2 here, this 20%, then you can see the math works out pretty good, right? So you'd be able to put in a 20% or 25% in this case rate recovery, and then our fiscal impact goes down to 0. However, if our customers, which would be a good thing again, long-term water supply, if our customers actually conserve 25% because our messaging was out there and we were really effective at conserving, as we showed in the last cycle, but we only had a stage 2 rate in effect, we'd be missing again another $3 or $4 million here, because our customers are conserving more than we had necessarily programmed into our drought rates. Again, that's a good thing. That just implies to me on the finance side that you probably have to hold a little bit of money in a reserve for a drought reserve, a traditional drought reserve, to make up the difference between what's happening in the real world versus what's happening on paper, on a drought rate package. So again, illustrative here, on purpose, round numbers and kind of easy to follow. But the point here is that if you're hitting it right on your target, 30%, 20%, 40%, you'll get your recovery. The first 20%, not so much, and anything kind of in between these stages, you're going to have some level of revenue loss. And again, that's expected. You can't solve for that necessarily. And I think that's just a reason to have both tools at our disposal: traditional drought reserve and also drought rates that can kick into effect. So this is my last slide, and I know I went through this pretty quick, so I'm happy to take questions, but recapping next steps: Marin Water does not currently have drought rates that are part of our Prop 218 package, so we will be working to incorporate the drought rate, at least approval through the 218 process, and then again, the board would have the option of when and how to implement those. Drought rates are intended to be temporary to mitigate revenue loss in the short term, so they're meant to have a very defined beginning and end. They're not meant to solve all problems that happen or all fiscal conditions that happen during droughts. Full cost recovery is not necessarily possible. Again, the first 20%, we don't sugar our drought rates. There's always a little bit of a mismatch between what the rates assume, what the actual consumption is. And then most droughts also need expense reductions and use of reserves. We're working with our consultants now to finalize the final rate design that'll incorporate drought rates. It will obviously depend on the overall rates in terms of the revenue requirement and the final rate package. So we can't finalize it until we're at that point. But once we do, there'll be, in addition to the Prop 218 notice for our regular rates, we'll have one page that says, here's what our drought rates may look like. And then finally, kind of bringing it back towards the beginning, we'll continue our public engagement on rate setting and outreach efforts throughout the entire process, continuing this month, the next, all the way through the spring. So with that, that's the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any board comments, questions?
Yeah, Brett, thanks for the another great explanation. You did note that with drought rates, full cost recovery is not possible. You didn't account for any extra expenses associated with buying more water. So that would also feed into that. Obviously, that was just a comment. But I think I missed the one point, which is why the drought rates don't kick in until stage 2, when we're at a 20% reduction level.
Well, I think my response to that, and I'm not sure if Molly or Paul have a comment on that too, but my response to that is it's kind of a natural kind of up and down of cycles that go through. And I think stage 1 and stage 2, as Paul pointed out, you try to set those to where they're going to happen every couple of years, right? Stage 1 happens every 3 years or so. So you don't want to be going to the drought rate, toolbox on just kind of natural ebbs and flows. As you get to that second stage, we do have drought rates that begin there. And so that's 65,000 acre feet. That's kind of more of a 1 in every 5 years or so, if I remember correctly, maybe 7 years. And so I think that's what they're intended to be. It's not intended to be there for every up and down in the cycle, but really for as you're starting to see things, get to the point where we need behavior change and we need, fiscal, kind of stability. And so I think by design, you want to kind of allow for that first 10 or 15% to.
And Brett, just to add a little bit, it is common practice where you don't out of the gate start applying drought rates. And part of that is kind of to convey we're in this together. And, in a light drought, we tighten our belts. If it gets deeper, we're asking our customers to help us out on the financial side. But I mean, the board certainly could choose to do something. It's just typically in the industry, you don't see it at the very earliest kind of voluntary level.
Yeah, that's helpful to understand. I'm not necessarily, pushing for a faster or a smaller trigger for the drought rates, but it's helpful to understand.
Yeah, and as we had the board just adopted the water shortage contingency ordinance, and in the ordinance it does explain that as the water triggers occur that are identified in the water shortage contingency plan, then staff and the general manager would be coming to the board to say, per our plan, and we're at this storage level on this date, we're projecting out and we're recommending that we go to stage 2 at a 15% conservation level. That's a voluntary up to 20%, right? So as we prepare our program and our drought rates, we can look at, when do the drought rates start to kick in, at what percentage level, and how do we plug that in? But it would be the board's resolution regarding conservation and each water shortage stage that would set that would correspond to the drought rate, so that we would have that correlation, just so it's sort of understood the structure that we just put in place.
Other board comments?
I think it's important that we indicate that these rates have been around since I joined the board in 2004 in some form. This is not something new. The triggers are different. The volumetric triggers are different, but the rate structure has been around for a long time. Actually, it goes back into the 70s at least. I don't actually know when it started. So this is not rocket science or some new idea. It's an idea that has been around for a while. It just had some implementation issues with respect to the Prop 218 process.
Great. Any other comments? I also say that I think this is a thoughtful approach. I think that by not having the drought rates kick in any more frequently, that creates a little bit of stability. I think where a mix of having reserves as well as drought rates allows for that kind of stability. And we do, you know, when we can, we are in it with our community in terms of when we see reduced revenue, we are trying to find ways that we can, again, mitigate those ups and downs so that there's as little just change or implementation issues for our customers. So I think it's a good balance, and ultimately it just reflects that reality that we just almost can't hammer home enough, which is almost 95% of our costs are fixed. And that is just inescapable. We're nobody, you know, the only way to address this is to recover our revenue in some way. There's no cutting back when our revenue goes down, because then we're no longer providing water for people or taking care of our system. And so it's just the fact of the way our utility and all water utilities function. Okay, let's open up for public comment.
We have 3 lined up to speak: Phil Sauter, Larry Minikes, and Ed Jamison. Go ahead, Mr. Sauter.
Thanks. I've been attending board and other community meetings for the past few months, as I've got an interest in conservation, water supply, and water rates. And I've been hearing some conflicting messages. One message is we don't have enough water and we need to find additional supply. Another message is that we're using less water and our revenues are down. For me, it's become very clear that these 3 issues are closely interrelated, and we need to end up crafting a single, simple message for consumers. As part of the rate setting process, we've learned that 2% of our water is charged at the Tier 4 rate, and not much more than that at the Tier 3 rate. So we know that our current rate structure doesn't help with conservation, and I'm not yet sure how the proposed new rate structure will affect conservation, and therefore what our need will be for new water supply. We've also learned that most of our costs are fixed, and this makes it difficult to set a rate structure based on water use. We also know that many of the increased water supply options, such as desal, will likewise tilt us toward high fixed costs, which will only exacerbate this fixed versus variable cost problem. And we also know that our non-potable water supply at, I believe, 2% of the total is way out of alignment with the water that's used outdoors, which ideally should be water that has not gone through our potable water and distribution system. Therefore, I'd like to recommend that before major decisions are made, and that includes rate adjustments as well as decisions on water supply, we look at these issues in combination. Once again, numbers are our friends, and I think the public needs to hear that the district has a single, simple vision for what it wants to do and what it wants customers to do. And they need to know that the district is here to help with well thought out programs. For me, a good rate plan is not one that kicks in after we're in trouble, but one that keeps us out of trouble. Finally, if possible, I think it would be a really nice message to customers to say that the rates per CCF for each tier will stay the same and maybe go down, but the tier definitions will change to promote conservation and avoid the need for going out and finding high-cost sources of more water. I said finally, but I'll add one more thing, and that is, I really think the district should be looking at developing its source of non-potable water and developing a distribution system to get that water to the relatively few customers who need large amounts of that water for outside use. Thank you.
Larry Minikes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. The most critical thing here is that this brings long-term financial stability to the district, so that projects underway don't get interrupted halfway through, studies, what have you. And the 2021 drought is a tremendous lesson here as to why this tool should and needs to be implemented in the 218 process. And it also gives to the ratepayers a sense of predictability. They won't be surprised if we go into a drought to find out that rates are going to go up. With that, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jameson, please.
Yes, these drought rate slides are another really thoughtful, concise, and readily understandable analysis of a complicated subject by district staff. Well done. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. There are no further speakers.
Okay, thank you, Terry. All right, we'll move on to agenda item 13, future meeting schedule and agenda items.
Good evening. I just want to remind the board that on Thursday, this Thursday, February 23rd, they will have the Finance and Administration Committee meeting at 9:30. It will be virtual. Next week, next Tuesday, is a special meeting of the Board of Directors. I believe that is the focus. The focus is the Strategic Water Supply Assessment. That will be at 5 p.m., also virtual. Then March 7th, there is a Board of Directors bi-monthly meeting. That meeting, there's a closed session at 5 p.m. and then the open session is again at 6:30. So again, we will start at 5 p.m. that meeting for March 7th. Then in terms of external meetings, the North Bay Water Reuse Authority will have its meeting on Monday, February 27th at 9:30 a.m. And the North Bay Watershed Association will have its monthly meeting, which is Monday, March 3rd, also at 9:30 a.m. And those are the only items I have for this staff report. Any questions?
Isn't it March 27th?
I haven't heard any different. I heard February 27th for the North Bay Water Reuse Authority.
I
Did
think it
change?
changed. I think
Okay.
so.
All right, thank you. I'll look into that and then I'll get back to the board.
Thanks.
That's correct, Terry. It did change. They
Okay.
canceled February 27th, moved
Yeah.
to March 27th.
To
March 27th. Yeah.
Also,
Yes.
Is it still at 9:30?
Yes.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Okay, that's all I have.
But sorry, Terry, just on that, the North Bay Watershed Association meeting on you said Monday, March 3rd.
Oh, I'm sorry. That
Right.
should be Friday. I
Friday.
apologize. You're
Yeah.
Friday,
right. That
Friday.
should be
Okay.
Friday.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank
I
you,
must be
Terry.
thinking it was a Monday the whole time. Sorry. Sorry.
No worries.
It's
Okay,
Always Friday.
yeah, sometimes. Okay.
Always.
So with that, yes, thank you. They're always on Fridays. Okay, with that, we are done with our agenda items. We are going to move back to a closed session.
We can stay on this link, President Schmidt. I think that would be easier, and we can just ask all the public to leave the Zoom, and we'll open it again at the end.
Okay.
Thanks all.
The host after I pause the recording here.
The closed session of the Marin Municipal Water District Board adjourned at 9 p.m. this evening with no reportable actions. And with that, we will adjourn. Have a good evening.
Take
folks.
care.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.